Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first webinar in our training for the members of Partner Certification Review Committees, sponsored by the Alliance for Certification of Lay Ecclesial Ministers. My name is Mike McMahon. I'm the president of the National Association of Pastoral Musicians, and on behalf of the leaders of all 5 organizations in the Alliance, I welcome you, and I'm delighted to be welcoming Sean Reynolds and Charlotte McCorkadale to help us to get oriented to the work that we're going to be having together. So I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves, and then we'll get on with it. Charlotte, how about you first?
Sure. Hi, my name is Charlotte McCorkadale. I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I work with an organization called Ministry Training Source, and I'm excited to be with all of you today. I've been working in this area of certification for the past 25 or so years, and I'm really excited about our opportunity to move this national certification forward.
Thanks, Charlotte. Sean?
And I'm Sean Reynolds. I'm the Director of the Office of Youth and Young Adult Ministry here in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be on this panel with Charlotte and Michael, with whom I've worked very, very closely for a number of years on this project. I am a Cincinnati native and sitting in my kitchen enjoying a cup of coffee right now, so hello everyone.
One of the nice things about not having us all on screen is that we can be sitting there in our slippers and pajamas and conducting these sessions, so I don't know what anybody looks like.
I'm in my pajamas, Mike.
Okay. Very good. Let me say a few things about how this is going to work today so that this can be a greatest benefit to everyone who's logged in this morning. On your screen, you're going to see a control panel, and if you don't see it, that's because it is collapsed into one side of your screen. At the top, you'll see a red arrow, and that is the control for you to hide the control panel or to bring it back onto your screen. So if you don't see it and you want to see it, hit the red arrow. If you see it and you don't want to see it, which I don't recommend, then hit it that way also. Right directly below there, you'll see a blue square, and that allows you to display the presentation on the screen either in one of 2 modes, either full screen or window mode. I do recommend full screen because that will save you the temptation of wanting to multitask during the session, but if you really want to multitask and do your email, you can put it in window mode and go back and forth. Again, don't recommend that. The third button down is a hand and arrow. That will allow you to raise your hand to ask a question on the air if when we get to that part of the presentation. So think about that for later on. And directly below that is you'll see a mute indication, and you'll see that in fact you are muted. That doesn't mean that you can't hear, as you probably know if you're hearing this. It means that you can't speak. We have everyone on mute except for Charlotte, Sean, and myself. That's so that you won't hear a lot of annoying background noise, and also to keep us focused. So in order to be recognized, you're going to have to raise your hand at the time that we get to that part of the presentation. We're going to be inviting your participation in a number of ways. One of them is through some polls that we'll be conducting during the session, but we'll also be inviting your questions and comments a couple of times. And there are 2 ways to do that. Sometimes we're going to ask you simply to type a question into the question box that you'll see on your screen, and I'll be managing those. And another way is that hopefully we'll have enough time that we can invite your questions on the air out loud. So, and we'll be asking you to raise your hand to do that. So I think that takes care of all the preliminaries. So we'll move on to the next part, and Charlotte will take it from here.
Okay, well again, welcome everyone. I'd like to share with you just a little bit about what we're hoping to accomplish in our time together today, and kind of give you a sense of where this plan will be going both today and in the future. Today what we're hoping to do is to provide you a general overview of the new national certification process and the national standards. We'll provide you a context for understanding national certification that's been developed by the Alliance, including a brief history and a review of some of the key terms. We'll also, and this will be primarily the focus of today's webinar, is to discuss your role as a PCRC member in the national certification process. As you might know from the materials that you received in advance, you play a quite pivotal role in making certification happen and ensuring that it's a quality experience for the Alliance as well as for all those engaged in the process. So we're excited to talk to you about the specifics of that. However, today we won't be talking a lot about the specifics of the application process and the portfolio. We'll provide a brief overview of those different pieces and how they fit into the overall process. However, there'll be future webinars that will focus in detail on a couple of different aspects of those different aspects of the certification process. So as we move on, I'd like to invite you all, if you wouldn't mind, just to take a moment. Michael, you can have them introduce themselves, or are you going to go through and let us know a little bit about who's here?
Yeah, I have a list of the registrants. There are 27 people registered, and I can see that on my screen it says 21 of us have managed to get here. So just so everyone gets a sense of who's here, I can tell you that all 5 organizations are represented. And I'm just going to quickly run down the names so you know who's with us this morning. Ken Johnson-Madrigon, Lee Nagel, Marianne Harrington, Scott Eakins, Michelle Tomczak, Rita Thyron, Michael Batcho, Joe Merkt, Robbie Anderson, Barb Legere, Isaac, Catherine Combier-Donovan, I'm sorry, that's Katrine Combier-Donovan, sorry, Katrine, Henry Bauer, Paul Colleton, Christine Edmonds, Jolyn Krempecki, Dean Mantronock, Aileen Halloran, Angela Gannon. Sister Angela has been and she's actually the chair of the committee, by the way, that is planning these webinars. Carol Jadak, Patrick Mooney, Juan Rodriguez, Lee Sturton, Bill Johnson, Lisa Tarker, Joe Pedroville, and Kathy Goller. So welcome, everybody. It's good to have everybody here together.
Okay, great. Well, maybe if we could take a moment as we begin today to recognize our loving God's presence in this day and among those of us who've gathered from all over the country today, albeit virtually, to reflect on this national process together. So if we could just pause a moment of silence, recognizing our Lord's presence within each of us and this community of faith gathered in our loving God's presence this day. Today is the feast day of St. Francis de Sales. After being ordained a priest, he labored for the restoration of Catholicism in his country. He eventually was chosen as a Bishop of Geneva. He showed himself to be a true pastor towards clerics and the faithful, strengthening their faith by writings, works, and example. So recognizing it's his feast day, I thought it might provide us a good example for our prayer this morning. O God, for the salvation of souls, willed that Bishop St. Francis de Sales become all things to all. Graciously grant that following his example we may display the greatness of your charity in the service of our neighbor. We ask this through Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so I'd like to start today by asking you to identify what maybe might be some of the questions you were hoping we would answer in today's webinar, given the context of it being an overview of the process. And so if you have a question, we'll invite you to type that into the space provided, and Mike will share some of those with us. If you would like to verbalize a question, which would be great, since we don't have a text chat that everyone can see, it'd be great to hear some of the questions you might have as well. So if anyone has a question and would like to share that with the group, and either one of those, that would be great. Mike?
Yep, okay. Did you want to say anything about the poll while we're looking at these questions?
Sure. And we have a poll up here. just so we can get a sense as a group how familiar you are with the standards and procedures. I recognize many of your names, and many of you have even served on many of the task groups for the Alliance in developing the standards and procedures, so I'm sure some of you are very familiar, but it'd be nice to know from those of you who are participating generally what our level of familiarity is. So if you wouldn't mind completing the poll while you're asking questions, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, here's some questions that are coming in. What kind of reliability do we have when making assessments of portfolios among groups and organizations? This becomes an issue of justice. Secondly, what is my time commitment and what are the communication patterns?
Those are a really good couple of questions, and we will be talking briefly today about some of the common structures that are utilized in assessing the competencies and standards. We'll get into more detail of reliability and looking at some of those common measures that we'll use as we kind of explore that further in the portfolio session. However, today I think you'll begin to get a glimpse of that. Regarding time frame, you'll get a chance to see some of the different tasks that have been involved. And I'll let Sean address those as we get to that. But Sean, it might be important when we get to that part, maybe if you might highlight the March 1st and October 1st time period and why the Alliance chose that, so that we could in many ways kind of structure the amount of time involved in this process, both for the national organization and for those who have generously donated their time to be a part of it. Any other questions?
That's all we've got so far, Charlotte.
Okay. Well, great. And so, folks, if you haven't had a chance to go ahead and register your poll, that'd be great for you to do so. And we'll go ahead and get those published if that's okay, Mike.
Okay. Do you don't see the numbers, do you?
I don't.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you. I'll tell you the results. Do you want to hear them now?
Sure.
Okay. We say 57% very familiar, 39% somewhat familiar, and only 4% not very familiar. So it sounds like we've got a pretty high level of familiarity among those of us who are gathered here this morning.
That sounds great. And for those of you who might not be as familiar, please don't hesitate to ask questions about this process or to clarify anything that Sean and I may discuss. In the 20-some odd years that I've been working in the whole concept of certification, one of the things that I've discovered along the way is that each and every time I have conversations about certification standards, I learn something new and get a different insight. I think the shared wisdom of the group when it comes to this work is really critical. And so please be sure you feel free to ask questions and make sure that you're clear on these things.
Charlotte, before you dive in, I just want to answer one question somebody posted, which is,
sure.
Will this presentation be available later? Yes, it is being recorded and will be available later.
Okay, great. So as you see on the screen there, this is who makes up the Alliance for Certification of Lay Ecclesial Ministers. Oh, there's the poll response. Thanks, Mike. Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is who makes up the Alliance for Certification of Lay Ecclesial Ministers. Right now we have 5 members that are part of the Alliance. As you see on the screen, the Federation of Diocesan Liturgical Commission, FDLC, the National Association for Lay Ministry, NAM, the National Association of Pastoral Musicians, NPM, NCCL, the National Conference of Catechetical Leadership, and finally, the National Federation for Catholic Youth Ministry, NFCYM. And you see the smiling, happy faces of our national executive directors there. I mean, I think the smiles are coming because they're also excited about this certification process actually coming to life and being something that we're actually going to do instead of just plan for. As you see in the center of the screen, Mike's going to animate the USCCB logo that goes in the center, because the USCCB Commission on Certification and Accreditation and the Bishop Conference in general has provided vehicles for national organizations such as the 5 that are listed on the screen, to do certification in the name of the Bishops' Conference. And so I'll be talking a little bit more about that as we move forward. When you look at these 5 organizations, I think you have to note that there's a few things they have in common. One, their membership is primarily all lay ecclesial ministers, and their organization's mission focuses on serving a specific population of lay ecclesial ministers. I think the critical thing to understand about the Alliance is that is there a common purpose, especially as it comes to the certification of lay ecclesial ministers. The Alliance has agreed together to provide a common approach to assessing competence for ministries for each of the following specialized ministries, and those roles are listed there. It's really important as you think about this common purpose to remember a few things. First of all, we need to keep our eye on the ball when it comes to certification, which is really the reason why we're doing this, and that's because the Alliance organizations want to serve the church by working together to put forth qualified ministers to serve the people of God. We must not forget that this is contributing to the effective ministry in the church. This isn't really about certification as a means to itself or solely the purpose of recognizing individuals. But the real common purpose that the Alliance shares is to ensure that effective ministry happens with God's people. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one, Mike. The Alliance probably said it best in their own introduction to their national standards when they say that ministry leaders who develop these standards and procedures did so to contribute to the continuing development and formation of men and women who serve the Catholic Church in the USA as lay ecclesial ministers, and a testament to a powerful shared commitment to well-prepared and fruitful lay ecclesial ministry. You might be asking yourself a little bit of why is this common approach so important? Well, in many ways, as we all know, the ministry landscape over the past 20, 30 years has begun to change. We have lots more people who are serving in multiple ministry roles. And even, in the research that we've done on youth ministry leaders, for example, one of the things that we've found out is that when youth ministry leaders indicate that they'll leave youth ministry, their number one reason isn't because of the salary or the time commitment, but it's to do another form of ministry. And so this whole movement among the ministerial workforce in terms of across the country as well as between various ministries really has caused the Alliance and the national organizations that have been a part of the Alliance to begin to examine how to work together. What you see on the screen now is a history spanning 20 years of how certification standards have evolved and grown and how we've come to this process today. You can see the different places where the NFCYM, NOM, and NCCL all went through individual processes in the 90s to get their national standards approved. When that was done, we had over 2,000 competencies. Well, Joe Merck happens to be on the phone today. Hi, Father Joe. Thanks again for being with us. Father Joe put together a common competency a book that began to say, here's some common goals that these 2,000 competencies attempt to achieve, because that was very important in the early days as ministry formation providers in Catholic colleges and universities tried to deal with these competencies and integrate them into their curriculum. Obviously, 2,000 was overwhelming. That led the ball rolling down the path to where these 3 organizations originally developed a common set of standards. And then in 2005, NPM adopted those common set of standards in FDLC in 2009. What you see on the screen is the first copy of the common set of standards that we had in 2003, and now we have a new version coming out. Let me just highlight 2 things that this history is telling us. First, that it's evolving. I think it's important to note that over the years, the way we've written standards has changed, and we've gotten better and better as a group of pastoral ministers in writing these standards. And I think it's important as we think about that we realize that you're a part of that contribution and that history. That as you are going through your task as a member of your PCRC, you're going to be contributing to helping to have this history evolve in front of us. I think the second thing that it tells us is that pastoral ministry organizations have come to value having standards for their ministry areas, and that working collaboratively together makes the most sense in a workforce full of slashers and full of changing realities. Let's go ahead and move on. We'll just kind of highlight now for you where we are and where we're headed. First of all, the Alliance, the way this has been structured, for those of you who haven't been a part of the different task force that have come together to write the standards and develop this process, the Alliance, as it's needed to get work done, has formed various committees that have taken on different tasks. And so you can see the 4 committees that have been developed so far. I think that's the only 4. I'm not sure. Mike, you might correct me if there's an additional committee that's doing work. But you can see the standards process and the standards and the process groups really have finished their work. And the advocacy group, which is led by Kathy Galler, who's also on this call today, and the PCRC training group, which, as Mike indicated, is being led by Sister Angela, are still engaging in their work today. In 2011, all 5 of the national organizations, alliance partners, approved their processes and their different ways throughout their organizational meetings and structures. In September of 2011, the USCCB met Commission on Certification and Accreditation and approved the national standards and processes. And where are we going? Well, the most important date that we're headed to is March 1st, which is the application deadline for the first set of lay ecclesial ministers who are seeking to become candidates in the national certification process. I'd like to tell you just briefly a little bit about the national standards document. And you've all had a chance to see this document. And I just want to have an opportunity here this morning to highlight a few things for it. First of all, you see one of the biggest changes that took place between the 2003 set of standards and now our 2011 set of standards is the alignment of the standards with co-workers in a vineyard of the Lord. When we first wrote the national standards in 2003, co-workers still had not been developed. Actually, in 2005, when it was published, the bishops acknowledged the work of the national standards in their document and in their section on authorization. It became very important as we were evaluating the current set of standards and moving towards this joint certification process that we align the new set of standards to the 4 areas of formation within co-workers. And so that's what you see there on the screen before you. Go on, Mike, the next one. So I'd like to take a moment to review these standards with you. I'll just go through and read each of these 4 standards. And as I do that, I want you to do something for us. I'd like you to think about, as I go through these, which of these national standards you would identify as maybe your strength of your own formation or strength of your own area of competence. And which of the 4 might be an area of growth for you. Because this is something really, to be honest with you, you're going to be asking as a PCRC member to do all the lay ecclesial ministers who become candidates. They'll be engaging in that activity too. They'll be identifying how they're strong in these different national standards and also what might be some of the areas of growth that they have. So as I review these, I'd like you to think about what these words are saying and which ones you might be strong in and which ones you might need to grow in. So standard 1, lay ecclesial ministers demonstrate the qualities of human maturity needed for fruitful ministry with the people of God. I'd say this national standard probably is one of the biggest areas of addition to this new version of the national standards that we have. Many things that were included in this were embedded into some areas of our previous document. This would be an area that I think we added a number of competencies, and it strengthened the document quite a bit. Standard 2, the spiritual standard, sharing in the common priesthood of all the baptized, the lay ecclesial minister demonstrates Christian spirituality as foundational to ministry, integrated in the service with the people of God, and possessing a sacramental view of the world that recognizes the world can be a vessel of God's presence and God's transforming grace. Standard 3, intellectual standard. A lay ecclesial minister demonstrates understanding of the breadth of Catholic theological and pastoral studies, as well as the intellectual skill to use that knowledge in ministry with God's people from diverse populations. This was the previous theological standard from the old set of standards. However, you will see a competency or two that have been added in the area of other areas of intellectual capacity, such as philosophy, sociology, etc. And finally, standard 4, the pastoral standard. A lay ecclesial minister demonstrates a range of leadership and pastoral skills needed for functioning effectively in ministry with God's people. So let's go to the polls. We'll do the first one. We'll start with our area of strength, and I'll invite you to put which one would be your area that you're strongest in. Do we have results, Mike?
They're coming, still coming in.
They're coming in,
a couple
okay.
more seconds, but boy, is this interesting.
Well, we're all excited and can't wait to see it.
Okay, right. I'm going to close it up and I'm going to show you what we've got. I think you're, well, I'll see if you're surprised. Ready? There you go.
Okay, excellent. So it looks like as a group, our strongest area is pastoral standard, with the second one following up in terms of intellectual. This is really interesting because in doing these webinars and in doing these different workshops, this is something that I've asked groups of people, especially lay ecclesial ministers, quite often. And your average lay ecclesial minister will put themselves, in my experience, highest in the area of spiritual standard. In the area of lowest will be the intellectual standards. Let's see where our area of growth might be.
Go to it, folks. Okay, we're going to give you just another second. All right, going once, going twice. Okay, we're going to close it up right now. And here you go.
Okay, so that is interesting. Again, so our area of growth would be, as a group, the spiritual standard followed by the human, which really aligns up with what you just said a second ago. All right, great. Let's move on then. Thanks, Mike. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the structure of the national standards and how this is an area that between the two versions, 2003 and our current version, there's been some changes. First thing that you need to understand about it is the standard document moves from broad and general areas to more and more specific and measurable areas. The first part of the common standards applies to all lay ecclesial ministers serving in the various roles that we're certifying in, followed by specialized competencies and indicators that are role specific. This structure was true for both the current set of standards and the revised set of standards, but the newest addition is the area at the very bottom, the indicators. I think it's important to note that as we wrote, and Bill Johnson is also on this webinar, and he led the committee that wrote the national set of standards and contributed a great deal to this process. In writing these standards, for the first time, we're utilizing these standards actually as certification standards. In the past, these standards were more used as a resource to dioceses who might be doing certification and into ministry formation programs as they engaged in forming lay ecclesial ministries. But this time, as we actually were in the process of writing standards that would be used for certification, we found ourselves challenged at a new and deeper level to be more specific and measurable with what we were trying to articulate in the standards and in the flowing competencies. And so I think what you'll see is the indicators that came about really are quite critical to the document. Even though you find them in the appendix of this document, throughout this process, you're going to have people asking you a question that will be echoed in your ears over and over again. And that question is, does this count? It goes back to the question that we had about reliability to some extent at the beginning of this webinar. Does this count? You're going to be asked that question about different aspects of ministry formation that people might be trying to apply to the national standards and demonstrate their competence. I think indicators for us serve a great role in that they begin to help us identify the question, what counts? Because it will be the measuring stick that we can start to say, if someone actually is demonstrating competence in some of the core specialized competencies, that looks like X. That looks like what's in the indicators that flow. And so I encourage you as a PCRC not just to leave those indicators in the appendix, but to become familiar with them and utilize them as you're beginning to examine and answer that question for yourselves, what counts? I think it will help you with understanding the measurability of the competencies themselves. I'd like to just call to your attention that in the document, core standards and competencies can be found on page 19. The specialized competencies start on page 24, and the indicators are on page 58. Also, you'll see a vision statement that's included there. And the vision statement really is just a summary statement beyond the individual standard that just describes what's in the standard. It serves no other purpose except to be descriptive. So as we wind down my part of things here, just a couple of more things before I turn it over to Sean, who will give us some more detail about the role. So I think the first question that when we think of this process we need to answer is, what does it mean to be certified? If you ask lay ecclesial ministers across the country if they've been certified, you'll get a wide variety of answers. Many times people will say, yes, I've received national certification. And that's really interesting because at this point, national certification, especially for our pastoral ministries, doesn't really exist. However, Mike, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Oftentimes people confuse certification, which is the process of demonstrating compliance with standards for professional competence, with the obtaining of a certificate that you see on the far right-hand side of the screen, a statement that a program or a course of studies has been completed through attendance, participation, or fulfillment of the various requirements. And I think that's the most important distinction that you need to understand and make. And you see there that accreditation is the same process, but it's a process for organizations or for programs to be recognized that they've met standards as well. And so there's a whole additional list of terms and acronyms that you might want to become familiar with. We won't go through all those because we'll trust that you can read them. But again, I encourage you to make sure that you're familiar with these terms because those are the common set of terms and definitions that the Alliance will be using, and that's on page 56 and 57 of the manual that you've received. Okay. So, a certification portfolio. In this particular certification process, the Alliance has made a decision to utilize portfolios as a way to assess competence. This is different than other types of certification and or licensure that might occur in professional workforces. Many times you'll see tests that are taken as a way to verify competence and verify someone's knowledge about a field. So you might ask yourself the question, why are we using a portfolio? Why don't we just create a test? Well, we know that there's probably a variety of answers for that, but I think a couple that we might want to focus on, first of all, is, and probably the most important, is that you're going to discover as PCRC members that the types of ministry formation programs that have been completed and the styles for that ministry formation are going to vary quite a bit. And so one of the things that a portfolio does for us in this certification process, it allows us to document, to invite candidates to document competence from a wide variety of backgrounds and ministry formation experiences. When you think about a portfolio, I think you need to also consider that it provides the opportunity to show both the breadth and depth of ministerial competence. If you think about it like an artist's portfolio or a photographer's portfolio, that this particular types of portfolios, when you think of those, that you can, photographer, for example, in their portfolio is not going to include the same types of pictures. Oftentimes you'll see them include some pictures of people and some pictures of stills and some pictures of scenes, etc. Some photographs that are color and some that are in black and white. Again, showing the range of that photographer's competence. The same thing is true for the portfolio. As I said before, the certification portfolio will be covered in greater detail, but since it's the heart of what we're doing in the certification process, just want to highlight to you that this portfolio will be, in our case, a collection of documents assembled by the candidate that provides evidence of one's competence in their particular area of the ecclesial ministry based on the national standards. The portfolio will include several different things, including, and these are different types of evidence that will be included in the portfolio that we'll go into in a more detailed way in the future. First of all, there'll be one type of evidence will be testimony in the form of different assessments provided by the candidate, their supervisor, a peer in ministry, and subordinates. Evidence of successful study in theology, pastoral ministry, and other appropriate fields will be another method, another type of evidence provided. Another type of evidence will be the demonstration of ability in one's particular ministerial specialization, such as a program, a project description, or maybe a verbatim of sorts. And also, each of the portfolios, and probably I think we're going to find this to be one of the key aspects of the reliability across certifications of the different national organizations, is integration paper that shows the candidate's ability to approach ministry in a way that includes one's personal, spiritual, intellectual, pastoral, and specialized competence. So the portfolio will go into in the future, but you can see the role that it's going to play in our national certification process. Now we'd like to take time, let me just tell you a little bit about a few of the key groups that are involved in the certification process. This again is in the glossary of terms, but all of you are involved in the partner certification review committees. Each national organization has one of these. The national organization, each alliance member will contribute a person to the National Certification Review Committee. And then the other group that's involved in the certification process is the Alliance Commission. In the process that Sean explains, we'll be highlighting some of these a little bit further. Okay? And so now I'd like to turn it over to Sean. Sean led the task group that developed the national certification procedures. Sean was, with his diocese, was one of the first in the country years ago to have his diocese receive approval for national certification. And most importantly, Sean was one of the ones, along with Mike, that helped bring this this document to the place that it is for submission to the USCCB. So he knows it in his sleep, I think, unfortunately. So I'd like to turn it over to Sean. Sean, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Charlotte, for laying the foundation for this further conversation about the certification procedures. Before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge some of those who, along with me, worked hard on these. Of course, Mike McMahon was on our committee too, but on this conference call, Sister Angela Gannon and Carol Jadak as well, and they could equally be giving this bit of presentation because we've spent hours and hours poring over these materials and developing them, working between meetings and in conference calls, etc. Here's what I would like to accomplish. If you have your document, hopefully you printed up a copy or can call it up. If you have your document, that can be helpful in this next piece of conversation because we're going to be getting into some of the nuts and bolts of how this is going to work, with the emphasis on some, not all. Charlotte mentioned earlier that the standards have been and will continue to be a work in progress, and I believe this piece of work as well will be a work in progress, and in fact, each of you who are a part of PCRC will be having the opportunity to further shape this material, as we'll discuss here in just a few minutes. In fact, this is a pioneering process, and I'm so very grateful for the level of expertise that's represented in the list of names that Michael read out earlier. It's really extraordinary and gratifying, too, that there are so many wonderful people with good heads on their shoulders who will be taking this piece of work to the next step. That said, what I'd like to do is highlight a few things in the document, call your attention to those, especially those elements that are relevant to you as a PCRC member, and then talk a bit about how they unfold in the process. And in so doing, what I'll be doing as well is calling to mind some things that are not in the document, and so in fact you may want to take a few notes along the way. There are some elements that, just by virtue of the fact that the document that we submitted to the USCCB-CCA was in a format that the CCA required, and it doesn't contain the fruit of all of the conversations we've had. So part of what I'm going to be doing is letting you in on some of the conversations that we had in our task group as we work these procedures up. So you have in front of you the table of contents, which is replicated on pages 2 and 3 of your manual. An introduction. Those introductory materials I think are all very, very important. General information about the Alliance, and then of course the revised standards in that first section. And then it's in section 3 that we get into the details of the certification procedures. I'll be citing some of those particular pages as we go forward. Inserted in here, in between the procedures and the appendices, are the codes of ethics of the Alliance organizations. And in fact, let me even just insert here that part of the feedback that we've gotten from time to time, actually I think Angela, you mentioned this at one point, that the pattern of some of these materials is a bit confusing because you have to jump back and forth in the documentation here to find things. And fact of the matter is that it's a format that the CCA insisted on, and so that's what you have in front of you. That's why the Code of Ethics are inserted there where they are in the document. So there's a direct correlation, a direct connection between the certification procedures and a great deal of material in the appendices, and I'll be trying to link those as we move forward. Michael, if you want to go ahead. What can seem to be a very complicated process, when you boil it down, I believe, is actually quite simple. But I think it's quite easy for someone who's not familiar with this kind of process to work with this. So let me highlight those 3 main steps that we all will be participating in. The first is the application for admission to the process and a decision regarding the acceptance as a candidate. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. The second is the preparation period of the materials by the candidate, as Charlotte mentioned, in the context of a portfolio. And then thirdly, submission of documentation, submission of that portfolio for review and decision regarding certification. The PCRC will be involved in all 3 of those steps, as we'll see in just a minute. What I think is important to highlight at this point is this, that it can be confusing for people that there are or at least it can be perceived as, two applications, an initial application, and then when you finally apply. That's why we work hard, finally apply for certification. That's why we work very hard on using the word application for admission at step 1 as different from submission of documentation, which is actually the final submission of all of the documentation and the decision regarding certification. Next slide, Mike. On page 15 of your manual, if you'd like to flip forward, you can find them there, but you might even want to take a note, even in the table of contents, a star, page 15, is a listing of the PCRC tasks and responsibilities, which I'll quickly highlight here. The PCRC receives, reviews, and approves that initial certification application material at least once per year. Now, as we know, and Charlotte's already mentioned this, there are 2 windows of opportunity for reviewing, actually, for applicants to submit and have their materials reviewed, March 1st and October 1st. The actual policies call for the PCRCs to deal with those materials once per year, and of course this has to do with the amount of material that comes forward. It could very well be that on March 1st there are no applications submitted. Maybe there will be 50, who knows. However, the policies call for the PCRC to meet at least once for that review. Secondly, the second bullet point there, it appoints and monitors the work of certification advisors. We're going to return to that in just a moment and look at that with some detail. Number 3, receives, reviews, and approves completed portfolios. Next, sends those completed portfolios to the NCRC if, in fact, they are approved. If they're not approved, something else happens, as we'll see. And then finally, submits an annual report to the AC. And actually, if you dig into the materials, there is something that is not on this list that you may want to take a note of, especially if you're a PCRC chair, and that is the review of applications for renewal of certification, which is obviously down the road. However, it's another responsibility that I suppose we missed when we were generating this list, that it's in fact the PCRC's responsibility. In fact, the chair, as it's written, the chair's responsibility, or his or her duly deputed representative, that's the wording exactly there, to review those applications for renewal of certification, and then if they meet the criteria, to pass those along. Now that's down the road. We don't need to pay attention to that there, but I did want to mention that the PCRC is also involved in the renewal of certification down the road. That initial application packet, as you see on your screen there, includes references, ministerial autobiography, evidence of education, formation, evidence of full communion with the church, criminal records, application fee. These are standard, and you may want to think of them this way, that they are a way of determining whether or not this individual is suitable for, not to be certified, but suitable for participating in the certification process. That's what we're trying to accomplish at this point, is both for the benefit of the applicant, but also for the benefit of everyone involved, that in this initial application process, that if there are any significant impediments to proceeding with the process, that those are found out now and discovered at this point in the process rather than more deeply into it. That's not to suggest that there is a real stringent kind of winnowing process that happens at this point. In fact, quite the opposite, that the sense of our committee, again, knowing Carol and Angela and Mike are in the conference call here, the sense of our committee is that if a person has a good shot at becoming certified, we don't want to intercept it here. We want to give them a chance to do that. So that's something that the PCRCs are going to need to work through. Essentially, if they have those criteria, that the criteria essentially suffice to bring the person into the process. So how does that process work? That's detailed on page 42. Again, my apologies. The format probably could be more easily dealt with if it were all in one place, but that's why I'm highlighting these pages. On page 42 is that application for admission, and the process unfolds like this. There's an initial application that's submitted to the national office. Now, this is one of the things I wanted to highlight that we discussed, but doesn't show up in the materials in your binder. Each of the organizations, the national organizations of the Alliance, may choose to do this a bit differently, and it will depend upon how that online application process is set up and the wishes of each of the organizations. We had discussed in our committee, though, that rather than, as it's written in here very simply, because we didn't want to further complicate things for the CCA, in the documentation it says that applications would be submitted to the PCRC chair. On our committee, we actually suggested that perhaps the national organizations, if they have the resources to do that, the staff to do so, would be the first connecting point between an applicant and the certification process in terms of this initial application. That in fact it could be, because you're just checking things off on a checklist, it could be that a staff member at the national organization would be reviewing the material and actually doing that administrative step of determining whether or not the materials are complete, not whether or not they are sufficient or adequate to being admitted to the certification process. That's PCRC's job, but if it's simply a matter of looking to see if all of the materials are together, our sense is that the PCRC chairs are going to have plenty to do, and staff, again, if they're available in the organization, may be able to do that task of reviewing the materials and then passing them on to the PCRC chair when they're complete. Notice there A and B. If complete, the national staff would forward the application. If incomplete, the national staff would inform the applicant that something else is needed. The look at 3, PCRC chair then arranges for a PCRC member to have the initial conversation with the applicant. I'm going to return to that in just a minute, that initial conversation, because we spent a great deal of time in our task group on that particular item. Our sense was that a conversation is needed. But for what? We're going to get to that in a minute. Number 4, PCRC then would meet to deliberate and decide on the application. That could be in person or via conference call. And then finally, that the chair would communicate the decision to the applicant. Let's go ahead and move forward. Regarding that initial conversation, this is what that asterisk is about. The initial conversation is not an interview to determine the suitability of the person for certification. That would be way too close to the beginning of the process to do any kind of weighing like that. The objectives, however, are these: to make personal contact, to ensure that the applicant understands the process and what's expected, deadlines, fees, and in that is in that conversation intercepting any kind of, not misinformation, but rather misunderstanding of what's involved, the timelines that are involved and fees and such, so that when the applicant moves forward, that the PCRC and the applicant have confidence that we all know what is involved and we're all on board with the process. And then finally, to respond to any questions or concerns, the goal being that, again, the applicant and the PCRC, that everyone's on the same page regarding what the next steps are and what will be required. Next. Assuming that the applications would move forward, and our sense is that by virtue of the conversation and then PCR review, our sense is that probably most of the applications will move forward. Because any problems or impediments would have come up in the conversation, and the person probably would not proceed to apply. But it is the right of the PCRC to go back to the applicant and say, we need to know a little bit more about you and what you're up to before you move on to the process. However, assuming that the PCRC moves on with the process, we have step 2 here, which is the preparation of materials. The candidate develops a certification portfolio with the assistance of an advisor. Let me insert here just a bit of clarification, which was an important point of clarification, but again, may not be manifestly clear from the materials. If, in fact, a person who applies for certification is, in his or her judgment, so manifestly close to completing all of the requirements and criteria, and in fact, here's an example that comes to mind. There are actually some ministry formation programs in the context of which a portfolio is created. A person may be completely theologically well prepared and have all the coursework done and ministerial experience. For that person, perhaps there would not be a need for an advisor. This was an important point in our task group to clarify that there may in fact be people who are like that. Maybe in fact people on this conference call who for them certification would, in creating this portfolio, would be a fairly simple matter of compiling information that they've been compiling for years. In that case, there isn't a requirement, and that when you go to the documentation, you'll see that there isn't a requirement of an advisor, but rather our sense is that we want an advisor to be available if, in fact, that would be helpful for an individual to move through the process. Our sense is that if, by virtue of the self-assessment, the individual finds, the applicant finds that they have a significant amount of work to do to be eligible for certification, then an advisor really is warranted and would be very, very helpful. These are the elements. I won't go down them there. They're written in the documentation, the elements of the portfolio as bulleted here. Let's go ahead and move on down to the next slide. Part of the reason I'm moving quickly through the portfolio is that my understanding is that it's in subsequent sessions, the portfolio is going to be the primary topic of training for PCRC people. That's not our point in this particular webinar. So if you have questions that come to mind, please write those down and bring them to the next webinar, or in fact, when I believe Michael is going to be surveying you regarding your sense of what this webinar accomplished and further questions you might have, please submit them, which will be helpful in the preparations for the next webinars. On page 43, there's a description of the certification preparation process, which broken out comes together like this, that the PCRC chair contacts the applicant to discuss the benefits of an advisor. Again, now you understand why that's the case. It could very well be that an individual, by virtue of his or her background and experience, would say, I don't need one. I would say, though, that our committee, I think it would be true to say that our task group that worked on these would assume that having an advisor would be the default. That would be the exception not to. Be a good way of saying it. So if an advisor is warranted, the PCRC chair arranges one for the applicant. It's not someone that the applicant goes out and finds. It's someone that the PCRC chair arranges. And then finally, there, number 3, and this is something that you may want to highlight because it's not crystal clear in the documentation in the manual. The PCRC chair and members establish a pattern of accountability and support with the advisor. I'm thinking, Mike, conversations you and I have had, and here in Cincinnati, as we've done certification and have had people filling this role, I think we are in agreement that this is one of the places where the process can break down. In fact, if the advisor and the applicant, the person who's preparing the portfolio, are not conferring with one another, are not talking on, say, perhaps a monthly basis or on a regular basis, it's very problematic for 6 or 8 months to pass without our knowing that. As you might imagine, that the person can, especially in the creation of the portfolio, frequently it happens that they get bogged down or distracted, or life happens and they're not able to get to things. We want to avoid as many surprises as possible on both ends, for the applicant's sake and for our sake. And so some pattern of accountability, of regular communication with the advisor, between the advisor and the PCRC, is recommended. Moving on page 17, the advisor helps the applicant to translate the self-assessment into realistic learning plans and documentation of competence. I'd like to call your attention especially to these pages 101 to 116, because it was only in my preparation for this webinar, and this is literally after hours and hours of poring over these materials and getting them ready for the CCA, that I noticed that there's something missing in your table of contents. If you, in fact, turn to page 3 in your table of contents, you'll find 3.7 portfolio elements, title sheet, cover letter, portfolio checklist. There should be, and this is just a failure of the electronic process of developing a table of contents, there should be a 3.7.4, and that would appear on pages 101 and 116, and it includes the self-assessment and the personal ministerial development planning worksheet. So the advisor, again, is going to need special training and preparation and assistance in helping applicants work with that self-assessment, work with that ministerial development worksheet, which can be multiply photocopied and used to provide a format for filling in the gaps in the person's development theologically or ministerially, so that when they finally come around to finishing up the portfolio, there aren't any significant gaps. The advisor would orchestrate in conjunction with the applicant. In fact, my recommendation, based on experience in Cincinnati, is that it would be a mutual agreement, and that the main responsibility, in my view, ought to be on the applicant to be contacting the advisor in this regular pattern. And then if the applicant doesn't contact you, then the applicant, or the advisor rather, would follow up. I'd like to put the responsibility on, as much as possible, on the person who's creating the portfolio, so that the advisor isn't inadvertently put in the role of the person in the wings who is always chiding and reminding and kind of on the back of the person who's creating the portfolio. It is the role of the advisor to remind the applicant of deadlines and to assist the applicant in the development of the portfolio, what ought to be included or not, in helping to determine suitability of materials for submission. Frankly, I believe that you, as members of PCRC, that will be an extraordinarily important element of what you will develop. We've created the framework, but getting into the actual connection between those materials that are in our list of requirements and the indicators, as Charlotte pointed out, and the quality of the material that is submitted, there's a lot of this that is yet to be developed, and I'm hopeful that the 5 organizations will be in conversation with one another about what you'll be learning through those steps. Michael, forward. Finally, regarding the advisor role, this is something we very much struggled with. In fact, the term we came up with at first was mentor, and we came to reject that term because it's used in multiple situations and means many different things to people. And so we want to clarify, for the benefit of those of you who will actually be serving both as PCRC and advisors in this initial round, to clarify that the certification advisor is not a ministry mentor. And take it from me as one who has done this kind of advising for a number of years, there is a slippery slope that one can move down, because frequently an individual will want to use that relationship for assistance, and it's natural to do that. And that's not to say we can't give ministry advice or suggestions, but it's very, very important for the advisor to keep clear on his or her role, that My job is to assist you in moving toward these deadlines and creating your portfolio, and that most significantly is how I'm here designated to help you. So the certification advisor is to assist the applicant regarding the self-assessment, planning to address competency needs. In other words, the advisor really ought to be a learning guide who is in touch with a whole variety of resources that can assist the individual in addressing the learning needs, the ministry development needs that are highlighted in the self-assessment. Actually, the person ought to be knowledgeable about the portfolio. Oh, you move forward. Mike, could you back up?
Okay.
And then finally, in helping to determine when that portfolio is suitable for submission. And again, it highlights that pages 101 to 116. Okay, now move along, Mike. Regarding portfolio review and approval, to say it very, very clearly to those of you, again, who are on these PCRCs, your job is, again, to help determine the suitability of materials for submission, which leads to this conclusion, and I'm hoping that PCRC members will be helping one another with this, developing your own expertise in portfolio development and assessment, including assessing the suitability or lack thereof of particular materials for portfolios. Charlotte mentioned this, and I know from her experience in Minnesota this was significant. The does this count question, as she said, or should I put this in, or is this too much? Questions about materials that have been generated in programs 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. Should I put this in? Should I put that? It's likely that you don't yet have that, and that's okay. You don't. The sense is that our sense is not that you should have that yet, but as an advisor and a person, and as on a PCRC, and actually training advisors, that will become a really critical element of advisor training. You're going to be hamstrung if you're an advisor and you don't have your mind around what should be in a portfolio and what should not be in one. Next. And by the way, my section here is coming to its conclusion. Should allow for a period of time for Q&A. Step 3 is submission of documentation for review and decision, which has a series, as you see here by the check marks, a series of reviews. The portfolio is reviewed by PCRC, then assuming it's approved, it moves to the NCRC, and then assuming that it's approved at that level, the Alliance Commission affirms that that final approval. Now, we've been asked, why are there these complications of these multiple approvals? Part of what's going to need to be worked out is once that portfolio is reviewed and approved by the PCRC, how much review is necessary at the NCRC level and then at the AC level? That is yet to be clarified. And the hope, anyway, of our committee is that there won't be a whole lot of redundancy in that. Although the NCRC, we felt, is extremely important because it's at that point that the Alliance's actions for certification truly become national and not simply specialized to the organization or to the specialized ministry. And it'll be at the level of the NCRC that they will be getting a sense of where the national organizations are, how their assessments are going, what are they learning, and what do we need to share with one another in terms of those learnings to help one another do these assessments of competence in a way that's consistent across the organizations. Next. On page 43, you'll see information regarding the submission of the certification portfolio. And here's the way that works. Just very quickly, the applicant submits the portfolio to the national office. Assuming the advisor said, yes, we're good to go, portfolio goes in, and the request is that that be done electronically. In fact, there's an additional fee if it is not. Number 2, the national office staff. Again, I've inserted here the national office staff. Again, according to the resources of each of the national offices, that portfolio may go directly to the PCRC chair, but in this case, I inserted, just for the sake of the administrative piece there, that perhaps someone at the national office is designated, again, not to review this portfolio by any review other than the criteria on the checklist. Yes, I see this, this documentation's in, okay, all these things, check, they're all there. This moves along to the PCRC chair. So if complete, it goes to the PCRC chair. If incomplete, if the office staff again does this, that person would alert the PCRC chair and informs the applicant of the missing materials. Number 3 there, the PCRC chair convenes PCRC members who deliberate and decide on the portfolio. This is another place where we're going to be learning a lot as you, as PCRC members, wrestle with the materials that come to you. Next. Number 4, and again, this is something that isn't highlighted in the material. It's more detailed than we wanted to pass on to the CCA. We didn't want to get things too complicated there at that level, but as you wrestle with your decision-making, decisions could take one of at least 4 forms. A, that the materials are incomplete, in which case you request more information. 2, approval, and then forward it as is to the NCRC. C, you may choose as PCR members to approve with notations and then forward to the NCRC. In other words, a notation is an item that the PCRC feels in its judgment ought to be addressed between initial certification, between certification and renewal of certification, that in order, in fact, for certification to be renewed, that something will need to be addressed. It is so noted in that notation. So the PCRC then could, as it says here in C, approve with that notation and forward to the NCRC, or not approve. It's written into the materials that the preferred decision-making process is by consensus in that decision-making. The PCRC chair then gets busy again and is responsible for communicating those decisions within the time frames that are designated in the documentation. Our committee was very careful to raise questions of accountability so as to avoid long hiatuses between someone submitting your application, not receiving any word back from the PCRC or the national organization. In fact, if you dig into the appendices, you'll see a variety of boilerplate forms, emails and letters by way of acknowledgement and response, so that there is a healthy interchange between the applicant, PCRCs, and so forth. Next. So to summarize, the applicant applies to the Alliance membership organization, not to the Alliance. There is no Alliance Central often. The applicant goes to the Alliance organization for that ministry specialization, assuming that there's a yes, go forward, the portfolio is developed, probably with an advisor's assistance. Portfolio is submitted to the PCRC. On PCRC approval, the portfolio and recommendation to approve sent to the NCRC, and then upon NCRC approval, the recommendation to approve goes to the AC for final decision, again within the time frames that are stipulated in the documentation.
Whew.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, there we go.
Yes, that's simple.
Thanks both of you very much. We're going to take time now for questions. We're at 12:16, or 12:16 Eastern Time, and we want to see if there are any questions, and whether about the standards, procedures, portfolio, your role, and we're going to give you 2 ways of asking your questions. One is through the question box. You can type them in, and in a moment, I'm going to invite you to. Actually, you can go ahead and do that now. You can raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question on the air, and I'll watch for people who are raising their hands, and we'll take some questions live. You just need to let me know, and when I see that, I'll call your name. It's just like a call-in show. I've always wanted to do that, and we'll take questions both ways. So go ahead and do that. I'm not seeing anything quite yet. And just kind of waiting to see. We will end on time.
Call-in show about certification. Call-in show about certification. I'm just trying to envision it.
Well, you know, I think there's something there. I
think we should recommend that to Kathy and the advocacy committee there.
I think we could make it. We could make it on NPR, don't you think? Okay, there actually is.
There definitely. Okay,
there is a good question. There are actually a couple of people who have asked now, typed in questions asking about. Okay, so now where do people go? Not us, but where do like regular people go to find information on the web about the standards and the procedures? You know, what are the standards and how do you go about this? Does anybody have anything posted yet? Do either of you know anything about this at this point?
Well, I know that a very basic website has been put up with a basic amount of information, but actually, Mike, we were kind of hoping that you might have the answer to that question.
Well,
you know,
I do know
when the standards will go live and when application form will go live. Do you have any idea?
Yeah, well, I do know that right now you can find the basic information. This website is called lemcertification.org, lemcertification.org, and that will be the portal that all 5 organizations will be linking to allow people to access information and forms, like application forms, and the places where you submit your forms and where you can submit your portfolio materials as you go along. There's an integrated website being created. I did talk to Bob McCarty last week, whose office is managing the creation of this website, and they were expecting to have the application materials ready by this week sometime, and so I've been watching for it, but I have not seen it yet. So that is what's going on. I do believe, I think NALM actually on their website has posted some information in text form for people, so you might check that out too. And Chris, you can type in there if you know anything. Or
do you know when the national standards will be published or shared with the?
I do know that they had a meeting this week among themselves, the editorial committee, to kind of map out the plan for that. So that is also on the drawing board. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Let me kind of, here's another question. Where and how will we be able to communicate as PCRC members? Anybody?
Well, we're assuming that each organization will create structures for the communication and meeting of their own PCRC members. In terms of PCRC members communicating with other PCRC members, I don't know how much of that will take place. Sean, in our NCRC is made up of the PCRC chairs, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, and so that'll be another way that communication will take place is through the chairs and their communication when they meet as an NCRC.
If I could insert, just to piggyback on that, Charlotte, I think this is part of the mechanics of this that is yet to be discovered. And a concern that I would raise is this: if those PCRC chairs, and this would be entirely understandable, focus solely on getting their own kind of house in order, without having what I think would be really valuable conversations nationally with the other PCRC chairs, I think that would be, they would find down the road that when they finally come together, that they will be intercepting probably some issues or concerns or learnings or understandings that if they had been in contact earlier would be obviated. So just a suggestion, although again it's not in the materials, exactly when the NCRC would get in motion. I think building in some communication patterns. I think whoever brought up that question is a genius. You know, that communication patterns between the organizations through the NCRC would be brilliant.
Chris Anderson typed in that the LEM certification website is up and running, so check that out for yourself. Here's another question. I heard you say that advisors weren't absolutely necessary, but on the last slide, it seemed to indicate that advisors were part of the process. Can you clarify?
Yeah, I can clarify this way, that when we put the slides of the webinar together, they came from two different places. So I didn't have a chance to, in the slides, to kind of alter that a bit. Suffice it to say that, again, the default is, yes, an advisor, but that's not a prerequisite. It's not a requirement, and it's something that will need to be worked out between the PCRC and the individual applicants.
Okay. Here's one. Is there a deadline for the PCRC to contact the applicant once they apply for admission?
You know, there is, but can I pull that out of my head?
It's 30 days.
What's a month, maybe?
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
a month,
it's 1 month.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, it's 1 month. Thanks.
Brainstorming might be good to compile FAQs for PCRC folks as we all begin to go through the process, as we'll be learning on the job, and it might help as issues arise. The other thought was to have case studies or something like that for us to work through.
That's a great idea. And we'll make sure and try to maybe include some of that in the future trainings.
Here's one. How do applicants know who to contact for appeals?
My assumption, now these materials aren't all together yet, but my assumption is that the section in the documentation on appeals will be included in whatever documentation that any typical applicant would get. This is something that the CCA has been careful about. Now, the CCA is under different leadership at this point, but I think wisely so, the CCA has been very careful to look at the materials that are put into the hands of applicants through an ethical lens or an ethical perspective, so that the applicant has everything he or she needs to navigate through the process, and that would include appeals and grievances, et cetera. Now, I'm not intimately involved in that process of getting all that material translated from our documentation up on the web, so I don't know if it's there yet, but it should be.
Just also on that, the appeals are there is provision for appeals of certification decisions, but there is no provision for an appeal of an application decision.
That's correct.
Yep. Here's another. Is there a fee involved in renewal? Of course, the obvious answer is yes. Hello, yes.
This is what I have to do, is go to my table of contents, procedures for renewal on page 44. See, I don't have all this stuff memorized, guys.
Well, it is in the document.
Come on now, Sean. I thought you would have had this really.
Well, in fairness, everybody has the document, and you will find it in there. In fact, there is a fee.
I'll tell you what, I'm looking at the section right now, and I don't think that's stipulated, but I'm sure there will be.
It is stipulated in there somewhere, and I don't recall.
It's somewhere. It's probably in the application, Michael.
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
Well, here's another. Will there be any publicity by the Alliance beyond the website on this initiative?
Maybe we should activate, if Kathy Goller is still on, Kathy's audio, so she might.
Yeah. Kathy, Kathy, if you're there, I am going to unmute you right now. Kathy, are you there?
I am unmuted.
There you are.
Unchained.
Kathy, can say a word about that?
I will attempt to. Yes, the Alliance is working together to create some marketing and advocacy materials. I'm chairing a task group for the Alliance that includes representatives from all of the organizations to put some pieces together. You know, admittedly, the work is slow. As much of this, I like the word Charlotte used earlier, is evolving. But we have put together at least an initial postcard, which was the content of the lemcertification.org site until, as Mike said, that new site has just gone live. So we've been working at providing information, at least for the website, for some of that collateral to be given out to people. We'll be working on some handouts that could be disseminated, handouts or brochures. We're also considering things like contacting dioceses to work with them on what we're calling a pilot diocese approach, where we might get some dioceses around the country to buy into this national certification process and really be our first guinea pigs to move this forward. So we do have a complete advocacy marketing plan. It's everything from trying to get articles and some coverage through press releases and articles in national publications, all the way to presence at national conferences and exhibit spaces and workshops, etc.
Great. Thanks a lot. Just somebody did ask us to repeat the link for the website, and it's LEM, Lay Ecclesial Ministry, certification.org. That's lemcertification.org, so check it out. I think we've really come to the end of our time. I just wanted to say that we are going to be sending all of you a survey about this webinar to see how it was for you, and also to kind of get your suggestions for the future. Recall that there are 3 webinars planned in toto for this series. This is the first one, the overview. The next one is scheduled for February the 15th, and it is going to deal with the application itself. Presumably, if we start getting applications on March the 1st, we're going to need a lot of guidance and sort of some forethought about how to handle those applications and what to be looking for. What are the criteria? How do we manage them and deal with them in a way that's going to work best? So if you can plan to be there on February 15th, great. If not, remember, we are going to be recording these. So please fill out that survey when you get it. So thanks a lot to Sean and Charlotte.
Michael,
great job. Yes.
If I may,
yeah.
the answer to the question on certification renewal,
yeah.
and I have to say this, otherwise it would bug me the rest of the day, is on page is on 129, and it's set at $145.
There you go. So for just $145, you can get 7 more years of certification. There you go. So thanks to everybody. Thanks, Charlotte and Sean. You did a great job. I think we got a lot of great information and good orientation. And I know we're going to all be working together at this for a long time. So everybody, thanks so much. We're going to sign off now, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.